If you, are you really tired, do you think, you people? No? If you are, you can lie down. You are already eating, some of you, I can see. You might just as well. Yes, well, let some others come in now. They are coming in. Encouraging to look at you all eating and drinking. It's a great thing to look at it, you know. And all I've got in here is a little bit of old water. Well, friends, we were in the previous session, we were talking about the weakness of our institutions today, and how this weakness often clouds the issue for us of the greatness of the institutions of the faith. We think, oh, well, we may look upon it as a weak institution, and therefore we will not be able to appreciate the power and the glory and the greatness with which these are invested. Now, I wanted to go a little further here and talk about this a little bit more, because it's very important that we understand the nature of our institutions. The nature of our institutions are embryonic. We are dealing with embryonic institutions of the faith. They are not the institutions which are now able to govern mankind. They are embryonic, in the same way that the child in the womb of the mother has life, but it cannot do anything at this stage. It has a great future. These institutions of the local spiritual assemblies become houses of justice in the future. But now they can't become houses of justice. Now, in order to explain this point, I would like to draw your attention to the institutions of the outside world. The institutions which you will find mankind has built up for itself. There are many institutions, religious institutions, there are political institutions, social institutions, all over the world. But these institutions are all man-made, and there is no life in them. No life, really. You look at any of these old world institutions, there is no life. They work like machines. Machines have no life. If you look at a machine, it has no life. But for a machine to work, all parts of that machine must work in perfection. Isn't that right? If you're having a machine, you cannot have a machine which it will not work unless everything is perfect. This is a fact. We know this. One little thing goes wrong in that machine, the whole thing will stop. So the emphasis is on perfection. But there is no life in it. Now you compare that machine with a child of 3 years of age and see the difference. Our institutions are like that child. You compare the outside institutions, which are like machines, and they have to work in perfection. Every part has to work in perfection. Now you compare that with a child of 2 or 3 years of age. You will find the child has no perfection. You see the difference now? It has no perfection, but it has life. And it has the promise of the future. This is the difference. Our institutions are like this. They are in the state of infancy. They are not perfect. They make a lot of mistakes, both local and national institutions of the faith. But they have life in them, and they have the promise of the future. You know, when you have a child which is very young and he comes into the room, we have none of them in here, by the way. We have got some beautiful children sitting who are much grown up. But I mean smaller than these children. If they come into the room, they are going to disturb a lot of things. They they could disturb a lot of things. A small child could pull things up and break up things and draw lines on the walls for you and all kinds of things they do. But the parents are not worried about this. Why is it that the parents are not worried about all the imperfections of their child and all the wrong things he does? Because they know in the future he's not going to do it. That's all. They know when he grows up he's not going to do it. That's not why they're not worried about it. This is exactly the way we are. This is exactly the way the House of Justice is dealing with the local and the national spiritual assemblies of today, and the same way the Guardian did before them. They are not worried about all the mistakes we make at all. And you know, we make a lot of mistakes in our institutions because they are not infallible. I was talking to somebody in the House of Justice, a member of the House of Justice, and he was telling me, he said, nearly we come across maybe with 20 or 30 mistakes that the National Assembly has done, some very serious mistakes, but we don't bring it to their notice. We let them grow out of it. They have to grow out of it. Maybe if there is one of them out of this 20 or 30, which is fundamental point, we will bring up to their notice. You will be surprised to hear how many mistakes and wrong things and wrong attitudes that we have in our institutions, which are overlooked completely. They are not brought us to our attention. In the same way that a father or a mother would not and cannot, in fact, expect his child to act like a mature person. Can you do that? Can you ever do your child to behave like a grown-up person? If you do it, you're going to destroy him. But you must let him make all the mistakes and pull all the things together and push all the things down and break things up. And he grows and grows out of it himself. If everything that he does which is wrong, really it's by our standards, by the adult standards, everything that he does really in the house is wrong. Now if we try to correct him, punish him right, left and center, the minute he does a move, you just change it, he's going to become a nervous wreck. He will not grow. Whereas you have to let it do all these things and it'll grow out of it. But if he does something fundamentally wrong, oh yes, if he's going to burn his finger, you just pull him back. But other than that, you will put up with all the wrong and the difficulties that happens in the home with the child, because you know in the future he's not going to do it. This is exactly what the House of Justice today is doing to us. They know we make all the mistakes and all the weaknesses we have. Oh, so many things. And yet, they don't draw to our attention. So you see, the faith has an organic growth. The institutions of the faith have an organic growth. And so our job at this time, when we look upon our local spiritual assemblies, is to love them and to cherish them, in spite of all these weaknesses that they have, in the same way that the parents love and cherish their children, in spite of all the wrong little things that they do. And not until we acquire this consciousness and recognize that these institutions belong to Baha'u'llah, that they have the future. Their future is great. In the future, they are not going to make these mistakes. And if they ever did, they will be held responsible by other institutions, by higher institutions. But you can't hold responsible a child for a lot of wrong things he's doing. You see, you give a nice suit of clothes to a child, and you let him out into the garden, he comes back rolled in mud. You can't keep him responsible. You don't blame him. That's a child. But when an adult, if you give him to an adult, a 21-year-old man goes out and rolls in mud, he's in trouble. He has to answer for it. But that time has not yet come. And so we are to deal with our institutions with the greatest love. We have to cherish them, we have to obey them, yes. And even they make wrong decisions. Abdu'l-Baha has said that you obey them and the right things will come out. And I have seen this happening over and over again. And sometimes it may be very difficult for us to obey them because we know they have made a wrong mistake, wrong decision in your heart of hearts. But we don't criticize them. It is forbidden to criticize the actions of the local spiritual assembly publicly. Oh, you can criticize them. The only way you can criticize these institutions is to write to them. If you have a criticism of any local assembly, you write to that local assembly and openly tell them what you think of it. Now, it is the duty of the local assembly then to pay attention to it and give you an answer and discuss it. Now, if you're not satisfied with their answer, you don't disobey them. You still obey them. But this time you turn to the National Assembly. And even if you don't like the decision of the National Assembly, you still obey them. But then you can turn to the House of Justice and say, well, I don't agree with this. But you see, we have all the freedom of criticizing. But once you did that, once you wrote a letter, and or you went and saw them personally, that's finished. The minute you talk it over with a 10th person, with another person, then that is a serious breaking of one of the very sacred laws of the faith. You can't go on and criticize a local assembly by writing to them your views and then going out into the public and constantly saying, oh, I think this assembly is doing this and this assembly is going to do that. This is against the faith. And the same thing is with the National Assembly. If you find that you are not happy with what the National Assembly does, you can criticize them in writing, but we cannot go out and criticize them in front of each other. But we have to obey them. But I know these things don't happen in here, probably. I'm sure of this. But I think that what we have to do, and this is a very vital thing, is that we have to cherish them and love them. Your National Assembly, for example, is a body that all the believers must rally around. You must pray for them. You must help them in your prayers, in your thoughts. And we must obey them, obey that institution, because it belongs to Baha'u'llah. It's the institution of Baha'u'llah's institutions. I feel that the best thing for me would be, maybe now, to turn to your questions and see whether we can at least end up this. And if those of you who come tomorrow, we could all together begin with a different subject. So let us perhaps see what we have here now and try to deal with some of the questions. Is that acceptable to you? Now, what I have said so far about teaching and this afternoon, if you have any questions that you even want to ask now, I can make a note of them in here and then we'll see how we can fit them in. Anybody else has any questions? Yes?
I'd like to be able to understand better how those of us, all of us that possess an ego and utilize that ego, how with the ego we fight the ego.
Oh, yeah. I feel that, yes, there's another question in here. I think this question of ego, you were here when I was telling you the story of the drop on the ocean? Oh, this is why. Yes, you see, the story of the drop on the ocean is this. I'll repeat it for you. This is a story of a little drop of rain, they say, was falling down from sky, from the clouds. And it was very proud of itself because it realized that it was the water of life. And water of life is very, very precious. It's the most precious thing in this creation. And so that drop of rain was very proud of itself as it was coming down until it suddenly saw the ocean beneath it. And when it saw the ocean, it saw its own insignificance. And it shouted and it said, if this exists, then what am I? Up to then, he hadn't seen the ocean, you see. And when it said this, the ocean attracted it to itself and made it part of the ocean, became a part of the ocean. Now this story is very apt in here. We are all like that drop of rain. And the self is that call, is that voice within us, which you call it ego, which is proud of itself. not until we see the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah that I was talking about yesterday again. And that is a very important key. Not until we see that. Now again, if you were not here yesterday, maybe sometime you can refer to some of these tapes. We talked about this. Or those of you who will be tomorrow, maybe I can read for you some passages which you can see what a tremendous revelation this is. Not until you see that great ocean and recognize it, we will not become humble. Humility, true humility really comes then when you see yourself as utter nothingness. Then the self will go into the background. Yes? Yeah, good. Okay, well, I think this is the answer I have. We must, not until we recognize the greatness of this revelation and turn to Him, we turn to Him with a feeling of awe and wonder, can we recognize our own impotence. And then disappear, or will not complete. We cannot destroy the self. We must not destroy the ego. The ego is there. You cannot destroy it as long as we live here. I was mentioning, well, I don't think we better go into that now. Take us further and further. Any other questions that you have? Very good. Yes, please. Shout about it.
How many tablets of Ahmad is there? And
what's this? How many what?
Tablets of Ahmad.
How many?
Yes. And also in the tablets of Ahmad, where it says, "Be as a flame of fire to my enemies, and a river of life to my loved ones."
Well, you said how many tablets of Ahmad there are, isn't it the first question, isn't it? Yeah. Well, there are several tablets which are written for people called Ahmad, but they were different people. You see now? There is one particular which is very famous. That's what you say. There is another one which is also famous, and Shoghi Effendi has translated parts of it in the gleanings, parts of it. Although his name does not appear as Ahmad in that particular part, but that's another tablet. And there are other tablets which are written for other people called Ahmad. So it's not easy to say how many tablets of Ahmad there are. There may be several, depending on the number of people whom Baha'u'llah had written to different Ahmads. Ahmad is a very common name. But there are two which are very famous and well known amongst the believers. One is the one we always read and call it the Tablet of Ahmad, and most believers are familiar with it. The other one is an Ahmad who was very different type of a person altogether than the other one. One was the embodiment of purity and sanctity, and the other one was the opposite. And Baha'u'llah wrote to both of them. The one that we read, of course, is that Ahmad who really was so detached from the things of this world that Baha'u'llah has given him such a great station. Now, when you say that Baha'u'llah has said that be as a flame of fire to my enemies and the river of life eternal to my loved ones, well, it is not necessarily meaning that when you see the enemies, you have to burn them up and destroy them. This is not what is meant. It's really meant, you see, a fire always in the writings. A fire is an instrument by which you can tear up and burn the veils which come between man and God. In the long obligatory prayer, you can say, make my prayer a fire that can burn away the barriers between me and God. So that when Baha'u'llah says that you should be as a flame of fire to my enemies, in one sense, you could say it means that you should burn their veils of ignorance. Fire also warms up the hearts of people. That's another thing, to warm them up. So that there are various tablets of Baha'u'llah in which he has in fact used these symbols very clearly. He has said in some tablets, for example, Baha'u'llah says to a person, he says, be as a flame of fire and with it warm up the hearts of people. So from these words you can deduce that it's not meant that you should become fierce with people. In fact, in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah has made it very clear that we should never interpret anything in his writings into that state of fierceness and rising up against other people. He has mentioned that, and I've actually, I think, quoted it in his third volume of the Revelation of Baha'u'llah when we are describing the fire tablet. Baha'u'llah says, do not use those passages which I have used in the fire tablet as a pretext to rise up and to destroy people's lives or otherwise to become an aggressive person. He says, these passages we have revealed in order to indicate the sufferings which have been inflicted upon him. And that he says in this dispensation, we must be always loving people, even our enemies. This is the teachings of God, and it will never be changed. It is the eternal teaching of God. If that was what was in your mind, perhaps this may be the answer to it. All right? Yes?
I have a crucial question.
A crucial questions we can't answer.
To myself. The tablet of Ahmad and the fire tablet, are those three pieces in relation to prayer on the one hand and reading the writings on the other? Are those, if you say those are reading the writings or praying,
we cannot really here draw. There is nothing hard and there is nothing absolutely hard and fast rule that you can say this is one and that's the other. There are many prayers which are like tablets. There are many tablets which are like prayers, half of them. So that we, again, remember, everything depends on your intentions and your heart. I can assure you that if every morning you read the prayers and thinking these are the writings, that will be acceptable to God. Of course it will be. God is very, very forgiving. And He looks at your motives more than anything else. But I think this, you can't draw a line between it. And I think that both of them are correct. Yes?
You mentioned somewhere along the line that there were some things that are counter to creation or...
That what?
That run counter to the creative force of God. You might say unforgivable.
Oh.
That keep our souls from progress.
Well, no, all I said was that one of them is what Christ refers to it is sin against the Holy Ghost, which is, to us Baha'is, is the covenant breaking. Now that you mentioned that, I think it's not a bad idea if I talk to you a little bit about the covenant. You see, I mentioned yesterday a little bit about this, and now before I go there, I want to put your mind at ease. Somebody has written me a letter here called Carlos. I don't know who it is. Carlos, you are the one. Now, I wonder whether we should discuss this thing with you later on, because this is all about the obligatory prayer, isn't it? And if there is time, by all means, we can discuss it. But it's something that you and I can talk about it. Asking some meanings of this and that. And the other person is called McGrath. It's you. Now, will you be here tomorrow? Will you be here tomorrow? Okay. Well, I'm just saying, in case we couldn't deal with it today, at least we can leave it. And there is another person. Who has written, his name is Thank You. Now, and this is about process of the lesser peace. Now, I'm just wondering whether that person will be here tomorrow.
No, but I can take it. It's my wife.
Oh, you will be here tomorrow? Huh?
Yes.
You will be. Oh, good. Well, then I like always to put the questions away, and that's how we did it. Right, successfully. Now we can talk. Oh, you are coming, yes? Yes. Yeah. What is the part?
It says here the tablet of the world.
Yes.
But do you recognize a similar expression with a different meaning or a different tablet?
No.
Okay, well, for this I mean, the expression is, in the index, you fail to translate Taherzadeh.
Oh. I didn't translate it, no? Well, that's my problem. Fault. Effulgences. I'm glad I'm not infallible, you know. I make a lot of mistakes. That's a great relief, actually, when you know that you are not infallible. I find it very good. And it's a great relief. And that's one of the bounties of God, really, that He has made us not infallible. And that make all these. Well, friends, I think it's not a bad idea if we talk about the covenant. But before I talk about the covenant, there's one subject that maybe we can talk about it now, and that is to close the materials that we have been discussing so far about reading, saying the prayers, reading the writings, teaching the faith, and we said how important it is, and as we go do these things, our faith will grow. And I mentioned that we must not become rigid in anything in life. You should not become rigid. These are the basic principles that we have to observe. But you know, if you didn't today, you will do it tomorrow. Don't be worried about it. Although tomorrow may never come, that's another thing. But and don't keep me responsible now and said that you told us not to do it today. And but all I'm saying is this, that we must become very much assured of God's bounties, which will come to us if we take a little step towards teaching and towards reading. God will help us enormously. And I mentioned that you could examine, you could test these things. You could test Baha'u'llah and see how much he will change our lives. I've heard many friends have come to us and told us the same thing, that since they have been putting these things into practice, that they have been reading the writings religiously. I told you like the story of the Irish girl I mentioned to you yesterday in Paris. Do you remember? Now, these people are so much out of the problems of this world. All the problems are no longer on their shoulders. They just feel a new person. They feel relieved of all things because their reliance is on Baha'u'llah. Although they may go through a great deal of suffering, but they know that this is a marvelous thing, and they endure it, and they love it, and they grow in the faith. So that all these points that I mentioned yesterday, the reading of the writings, the saying of the obligatory prayers, the living of the life, the teaching the cause, and the pioneering and making more local assemblies, really, these are the basic works which will help us to grow, and our faith will grow. But then there are dangers. Now, I'm going to mention some dangers for you here. Dangers. You know, if you possess a very nice thing, there are thieves who are ready to take it from you. If you have a beautiful treasure, there are thieves. There are some very dangerous robbers, highway robbers, who can rob it of you. Now that I'm talking of highway robbers, I remembered of a story which might be a good thing to hear it. Highway robbering. Do you know what highway robbering is? You have never been involved in it. Highway robbering is something which happened in the East very much. And when I was young, we used to go through it all the time. When you travel from one town to another, there are big deserts around. And these deserts, there are certain areas that armed men are there, bandits you call them, and they attack caravans and people who are traveling, and they will take all their things from them, everything they have. I think you had them in America years ago. You've forgotten the practice, huh? Nowadays, you don't do this, but in the old days, they used to do that. Now, in these highway robbers, there was a highway robber who somebody talked to him about the faith, and this is not a made-up story, really. And he became a Baha'i. But in those days, there were no local assemblies to help us. He just taught him the faith. He accepted Baha'u'llah and became a believer, but he continued in his work as a highway robber, you know. He was really sincerely, he was doing his job very well. He understood certain teachings, of course, and he also heard that in the faith there was no clergy, there were no priests. You know, this is one thing he heard, there was no priests in the faith. And he was very happy about that there were no priests, because after a year, when he met this Baha'i and he told him, "How are you doing?" He said, well, He said, my business is going on very well. In fact, it's much better than last year. Because he said, when I was a Muslim, I would never rob a clergyman, but now I do. Now this man later on really became a true Baha'i, and then he lived the life completely different, I can tell you that. We all change, you know. Yes, we were talking about highway robbers who robs you of everything. Now in the faith also, in our lives, there are very dangerous robbers for every one of us in our lives, which we have to be very careful. Once you become a Baha'i, and once you grow in the faith, and once you do all these things we mentioned, you have to be constantly watching. And it's a constant watching in the same way that you, I don't know what you do here, but in our countries we have burglar alarms and all kinds of things to protect us from this. Now there are I'm going to mention three very dangerous robbers of faith, who rob our faith away from us. The first one who robs it, and is the very dangerous one, is our own self. Again, an ego that we were talking about. That is the most dangerous thing, which can constantly direct us towards the animal world, the animal nature. I was mentioning the other day to some of the friends who were assembled here, it's like an aircraft. We are like a human, the human being is like an aircraft. We have two things. One is the dead weight. You see, the aircraft has a dead weight, which means that dead weight that drags it down all the time. All the time, it's ready to drag it down, to drop it. It is the weight, gravity. And then it has the engines, which are pulling it up. Now, the minute the engines are stopped, immediately the dead weight will pull the aircraft down, and it will not wait and say, all right, I'll give you 3 minutes. No, immediately it pull it down. So that, you see, the engines is our faith. And it must be always revved up. It must always be operating, always be on. If you are not on our guard, this dead weight, which is the animal nature in man. You know, we have two natures, the animal nature, which we call it self. That is going to pull us down. And so the only thing which will stop it is our faith, which can pull it up. And it's very easy to come down the hill, then go up the hill. It will pull you down immediately, the force of gravity. But for the engines to pull it up, it takes a long time, and it needs an awful lot of energy and time and effort. And this is one of the greatest robbers we have of our faith. The other robber, which is just as dangerous, is bad company. Bad company. Baha'u'llah has told us that we must associate with the godly, with the people, and eschew fellowship, he says. These are his own words. Eschew fellowship with the ungodly. Now, the ungodly does not mean a person who doesn't believe in God. Remember that. Oh, no. The ungodly is a person who comes between you and Baha'u'llah, and who says to you, well, look, you are a Baha'i, okay, but let us go and do this, let us go and do that. Directs you to do things against the teachings of the faith. The ungodly is a person who comes between you and Baha'u'llah, and who says to you, well, look, you are a Baha'i, okay, but let us go and do this, let us go and do that. Directs you to do things against the teachings of the faith. Let's go and do this, let us go and do that. Directs you to do things against the teachings of the faith. I've seen many people who become Baha'is, young people especially. The young people are more targets for this, much more than the older ones, in schools, in colleges, in society. I've seen some young people who come into the faith with great joy and excitement, and after a month you hear, where are they? Oh, well, this boy had a friend and is involved with the friend, and that's it. He's gone. The friend has pulled him the other way. The ungodly does not mean a person who doesn't believe in God, is agnostic or atheist. The ungodly may be a person who confesses in a very religion in a very sincere way. But a person who is an agnostic and an atheist may not be an ungodly person. He may be a very good person. And in fact, most of them are very honest people, very good. Most people who become agnostics or atheists, I think they're very honest people. they find that religion has been so misrepresented and so distorted in their ways by those who confess to have religion that they have just said, we don't want this. This is very honest. So this is the second dangerous thing that could rob us of our faith, really. We have seen amongst the young people, so many young people who have been destroyed, completely gone away because of this bad company, completely destroyed. People who were brought up even as Baha'is. And then the bad company, they got in contact with so many bad associates, and then they took them away. And the other one, finally, the third one, another thing which I'm sure doesn't happen in America, it's gossip. Really, backbiting. This is something which is, we must always talk good of the people. Always talk good of the people. Talking with people. Somebody said, when do we draw the line? We can always talk about people, but when can we say it is backbiting? You know, sometimes you talk about people. When does it become backbiting? I said to him, when you begin to enjoy it, it becomes backbiting. You know. Really, that's what happens. These three things, I think, are just enough for us to concentrate on these points and try to guard ourselves against this. We must always talk good of the people. Beautiful. Every Baha'i is so beautiful because the power of faith is working within that person. Because as I said this morning, well, we are related to Baha'u'llah. I am only related to him by name. That's all I can say. But that's a tremendous honor, tremendous. Well, now, having said this, let us go a little bit to the subject of the covenant. I wanted to mention maybe about half an hour here and talk about covenant. Again, yesterday we touched upon this. I mentioned that Baha'u'llah brought for us a great ocean of his revelation, a real ocean. In the dispensations of the past, the manifestations of the past, they brought also the Word of God. But in relation to what Baha'u'llah has brought in this day, it was not an ocean, it was a small pond, you might say. But they brought the water of life. Every one of the prophets of God who have come, they bring with them the water of life. And that water of life, when they are alive, when the manifestations of God are alive and they are with man and they are walking with man and talking with man, that water of life is fresh. It's like rain. You know, the word of God is like the coming of rain. When the rain comes, you become refreshed by it directly. You know, it comes to you and hits you directly. You become refreshed by it directly. But when the rain stops, when the manifestation of God is no longer with us, that water is accumulated then in a pond. And that's where you get your water of life. But he is no longer there to rain upon you. He's gone. Christ was here for 3 years. Muhammad was for 23 years. And what he left behind was the Quran, for instance, which became like the pond from which all the people could go and receive this water of life. In Christianity, we have the Gospels, which is the repository of the words of Christ. And it is like a pond of water to which people, the saints and scholars of Christianity, went to it. They took this water of life and they took it away and distributed it and gave this water of life to everyone. This is how other religions grew. In this dispensation, Baha'u'llah has brought an ocean for us, really an ocean. But in the past, when the Prophet passed away, he left this water of life free to people to use it the way they wanted it. Which meant that everybody was free. If you have a pond of water in your house and hundreds of people are at it, what will happen to that water of life? To that water? It will become adulterated because everybody pushes his pots and pans in it and washes things into it. And after a while, that water loses its purity. It's adulterated. This is what happened to older religions. The founder of the faith brought the water of life, but he left it freely to his followers. He said, here it is. This is for you. And the followers really so much adulterated it. They added things to it, to the Word of God. They took away things from the Word of God. They interpreted the Word of God the ways. They pulled it into pieces the way they did it. And so they created sects and divisions. They adulterated it. And now we look at these religions, there are hundreds of sects. It's because man has had the freedom to use this. Now, Baha'u'llah has done entirely a new thing altogether, which the prophets of the past had not done. Now, why they didn't do it now, this is an important point. You must not think that the prophets of the past did not know. Baha'u'llah, as you know, has given us a covenant, firm covenant. He has put a wall around this great ocean. And he said nobody has the right to touch it. Nobody has the right to interpret it. The other manifestations of God didn't do this. You mustn't say, oh, well, they didn't do it because they didn't know. This is far from the truth. The reason they didn't do it was because mankind in those days were not mature enough to be held responsible. Because once you have a covenant, you will have to be responsible. In the same way that I was giving you the example of a child rolling in mud, coming back with his new suit of clothes. He rolls in mud and he comes home. Well, he's not to be held responsible. Only when he grows up, you can give him responsibility. You give him a new suit of clothes, he goes back, he goes out. But if he rolls in mud, as I said, he will be in trouble. So you see, mankind had not reached the age of maturity to be able to hold on to the terms of a covenant, which is very disciplinary in its nature. You do not have to interpret the words of God. This is a great discipline. But in the past, they did. And so different religions in the past were divided into sects. And yet those sects grew together. For instance, in Christianity, you will see that in the early days, the Christian faith was divided into 3 or 4 major sects. But each sect grew upon the tree of Christianity. Each one drew its sustenance from it. You couldn't say one of them didn't draw the sustenance from the teaching of Christ. It was like a tree which had several branches. But today, it's different. Very different. There is only one branch. And anyone who deviates is cut off. And when you cut it off, you don't have to fight it. It'll dry by itself. Now, in this dispensation, as I said, Baha'u'llah has brought for us an ocean of revelation. But he did not give that revelation to us directly and say, all right, this is my revelation, I brought it for you, I give it to you. He didn't do that. He brought it for us, but he didn't give it to us. I think I mentioned that somehow in passing yesterday, reference. He didn't give it to us. He gave it instead to the person of Abdu'l-Baha. And Abdu'l-Baha became the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. All the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah were placed within Abdu'l-Baha, to such an extent that he had the powers of the manifestation. Although he was not a manifestation of God, he had the powers of the manifestation. It's like the moon. When you look at the moon, it has light, and it is beautiful light, but it is not of itself. It has not a light of itself. It is reflected upon it. Whereas the sun, like a manifestation of God, has its own light and its own heat. Abdu'l-Baha here is like the moon, which gives light. By virtue of being the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, he had all the powers of the manifestation conferred upon him. He knew what was in your heart, just as Baha'u'llah knew. And he had all the powers. And his words, although is not the word of God in that sense, but it has the same validity as the words of Baha'u'llah. In fact, in one sense, his words are more authentic than those of Baha'u'llah. Did you ever think of that? The words of Abdu'l-Baha could be more authentic than the words of Baha'u'llah. For example, if you ever come across a statement that Baha'u'llah has made a statement, say, and Abdu'l-Baha says this, really, he may make a statement completely opposite to it. Which one would you take? The words of Baha'u'llah or the words of Abdu'l-Baha? You don't take the words of Baha'u'llah. You take the words of Abdu'l-Baha because he's the interpreter of the word. So in that sense, his words become more authentic, if they seem to be contrary to it, because he is giving us an interpretation which we may not even understand, but it is he who can interpret for us. Yes? Yes, of course. The words of Shoghi Effendi are the same thing, because he is the interpreter of the word of God. But this is very rare that this may happen. It's very rare. But if it has happened, there are some cases. I'll give you an example of it. Baha'u'llah's secretary has written, he said that Bab and Baha'u'llah had met out physically in Tehran. It is in one of the tablets which Mirza Agha Jan, Baha'u'llah's secretary, has written. And you know, Baha'u'llah's secretary did not write anything of himself. Everything that he was written, it was dictated to him, even though it appears in his own, as if it is his own composition. But it was all composed by Baha'u'llah, everything that he has written. Now, Abdu'l-Baha says they never met personally, individually. So whose words we take? We take the words of Abdu'l-Baha. See, this is how we have to understand this. Now, I was saying that Abdu'l-Baha in here becomes the container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And yesterday, those of you who were here, I was describing how Baha'u'llah is like the summit of a mountain, and Abdu'l-Baha being a servant that no other human being on this earth can reach him as low as Abdu'l-Baha in servitude. He's the lowest of all in servitude. He's like a valley. Baha'u'llah like the summit of a mountain, and Abdu'l-Baha like a deepest valley. And so when the water pours down from the top of the mountain, it accumulates in the lowest valley. And so all the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah are accumulated within the person of Abdu'l-Baha. And then there is another thing you must remember, that the center, if I wanted to put water in this glass, and the water is pure, this glass must be empty. If it is not empty, when I pour water in it, it's going to be adulterated. And Abdu'l-Baha was that empty of his own self. He had no will of himself. He submitted his will to that of Baha'u'llah completely, utterly. And so he was a stainless mirror, as Shoghi Effendi describes him, a stainless mirror which reflected the light of Baha'u'llah in perfection. If the mirror is not stainless, it will not be able to reflect it fully. And so it was a completely empty and pure vessel in which Baha'u'llah poured his revelation within it, the forces of his revelation. And you must not think also that Abdu'l-Baha tried very hard and tried to become a very outstanding person as it was, and emptied himself. In a sense he did, maybe, I don't know. But he was certainly not a human being like you and I. He was created for this purpose by God. It was a gift of Baha'u'llah to mankind. It was a part of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. In the same way that revelation comes from Baha'u'llah and it is from God who sends it to us. Abdu'l-Baha was also a gift of God to mankind. He had the makings of being pure and empty of self. And so he was a perfect exemplar for the teachings. Now, Abdu'l-Baha, during the 29 years of his ministry, he enriched the Baha'i writings, the revelation of Baha'u'llah was enriched by it. He expounded it, he explained it to us, he put it in simple words for us. He guided us, he helped us how to live up to those teachings. And then, of course, as you know, here comes the story of self again, comes up. This ambition, this ego, as I said, is the greatest enemy. There were people who had ego, great ambitions to become leaders. And when Baha'u'llah passed away, and Baha'u'llah told us very clearly in his will and testament, he said, everything I have brought is within Abdu'l-Baha. I'm paraphrasing his words, or paraphrasing the thought even. But this is what he said really. Turn to him for anything you want. Outside him, there is nothing. And yet, there were some ambitious men who who, as soon as Baha'u'llah passed away, thought now the field is open for them. And they wanted leadership, just like religious leaders. Today we have plenty of them. This shouldn't be a surprise to us. Today the world is full of leaders. Everybody wants to become leaders. So you see how much we have a lot of ambitious men. Now, I'm not saying that in government, whatever they do, it's not our problem. They're not worried about that. They are all ambitious. Okay, let them be. And I don't think that it is bad to be ambitious in your work. Why not? You want to be, if you're doing any work, why don't you? We should do it in such a way that we become distinguished. We progress. We go higher up in your work. This is not a bad thing, provided we do it in the right way. And not to try to kill a lot of people on the way, but do it in the right way. A Baha'i who is working, whatever your profession, you must try to perfect it. You must try to be distinguished. If you're an engineer, be a distinguished engineer. If you're a doctor, be a distinguished doctor. If you're an administrator, why not? But we are saying in faith, in the faith of God, there is no room for ambition. And these ambitious men wanted to become leaders. There were so many of them. And most of them were outstanding teachers of the faith, who thought this is the opportunity to rise up and break up this faith, like the old days, into sects. And so they began to attack the center of the covenant, like men who come to attack this great wall which Baha'u'llah has placed around this ocean. They wanted to get through to this ocean, but they didn't succeed. And at the same time, I can tell you, it brought so much suffering to the person of Abdu'l-Baha that not until you study the history of that period, and maybe I don't think that history is yet really compiled, of the history of covenant breaking during the time of Abdu'l-Baha, in English anyhow. When you read that history of the covenant breaking and the sufferings which were inflicted upon Abdu'l-Baha, you will not believe it. The things that they did. How much they went, these Abdu'l-Baha's brothers, his family, the family of Baha'u'llah, they all rose up against him. Every one of the members of the family of Baha'u'llah, with the exception of a very few, rose up against Abdu'l-Baha. And then, hand in hand with some very outstanding teachers of the faith for many years, not only misrepresentations, but so many times they plotted to take his life. They did everything to humiliate, to misrepresent, and to dishonor him. All the time. This was going on. The intrigues were going on all the time. Now, it's beyond the scope of our discussions here to even go into it. If ever somebody can study that, you will find that no human being can ever go through so much opposition and afflictions. And yet, Abdu'l-Baha dealt with it personally with loving kindness, but for the community's sake with great firmness. And he said, those who were the breakers of the covenant, those who have arisen to destroy the cause of God, he announced them as covenant breakers, and we do not associate with them. That's all we do not do with the covenant breakers. You do not hate them, you do not fight with them, you do not try to destroy them, but we just do not associate with them. And this is a very important principle. Abdu'l-Baha said it's like a disease, infectious disease, which the doctor will isolate you. I mean, this happens in life. The doctor isolates you if you have an infectious disease. And this is because, he said, if 1,000 healthy people go near that one defected person, that diseased person, they're all going to take this disease. 1,000. That one person will not become better by associating with 1,000 healthy men, but 1,000 healthy men will become affected by one person who is diseased. You see, this process of covenant breaking, which did not exist in the past, they existed in the past, but that it was not dealt in the past. Nobody had the power, the authority to deal with those who break the covenant. Those who broke the covenant, if there was such a thing as a covenant. In Islam, there was a verbal arrangement or a verbal statement which was made by Muhammad, describing who should be the follower of Muhammad, who should be succeeding Muhammad. But his followers divided, and they disagreed, and they divided into two major sects. But they were both growing again. There was no question of cutting anybody off. They were both Muslims of different sects. But in this age, anyone who have risen up against the center of the faith, he is cut off. He's cut off. And I will explain to you this process of covenant breaking and the process of throwing away somebody out of the faith, cutting him off. As I said, like a branch which deviates and you cut it off. And when you cut it off, it drops on the ground. And for a few days it may be green, maybe a little life in it. But eventually it will perish. We don't have to fight them. We don't have to hate them. We don't have to do anything. But we do not associate with them. And the best example, again, to know this is to look at your own human body. The human body is the best example. If you look at the human body, you will find that a healthy person can always withstand any disease or germs or anything which comes from the outside. If you're healthy, you're not going to be affected by it. We always go through these germs and through these things. You always, through all around us, it's full of germs and various things. But you get over it. But if ever you allow poison to enter inside your bloodstream and circulate, that's the end. You can't stand that. It'll destroy you right away. And so the body has a system. The body has a machinery. The kidneys, this is the work of the kidneys. They inspected the bloodstream, if you like to call it. And they pick up anything which is poisonous. All the poisonous material are collected from the body, from the bloodstream. They won't let it go through the bloodstream. And at intervals, these impurities are thrown out. Isn't that right? If there was no kidneys, you know what happened to a person? Probably he would die after, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, a few hours. All the poisons is destroying you. That's the end. And so all the impurities are thrown out. And once it is thrown out, you feel healthy. The body of the cause has this machinery. The hands of the cause, it's their function. To be vigilant. And if there is anyone who is a poison circulating within the community, they'll throw him out with the approval of the House of Justice today. In the future, they will devise a different system, perhaps. But there is a machinery. And it does not mean that anybody who opposes the faith in some ways, you throw him out in that way and you call him a covenant breaker. A covenant breaker is a person who opposes the center of the faith actively. For instance, you may find a person who says, look, I am not a Baha'i. I was a Baha'i, but I'm not a Baha'i. Okay, this is not a problem. You withdraw his name. And in fact, you will love him and you will help him. You will associate with him. Or a person may have broken some laws and his voting rights is removed from him. Still, you can associate with him. There's no problem there. He will one day may come back again into the faith. But a covenant breaker is a person who actively opposes the center of the faith. For instance, he says, I believe in Baha'u'llah, but I don't accept anything that Abdu'l-Baha said and I'm going to oppose it. Or somebody may say, I believe Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, as they did, but I will oppose anything that Shoghi Effendi will say. And I am a Baha'i and I'm coming to your 19-day feast and I'm going to oppose everything that Shoghi Effendi has said. I won't let that happen. Or somebody today might say, look, I accept all the writings, but I will not oppose anything that I'll oppose anything that the House of Justice says. I'm coming to your 19-day feast, to your assemblies, to your communities, and I'm going to oppose everything they say. Well, this is the poison which is trying to circulate inside. And this we will not allow to happen. It's like a cancerous disease which happens. Sometimes you may go and the doctor says, I must cut your hand off right away. You won't object to that. You will welcome it. You say, all right, cut it off. Why? Because you know that if that cancer is allowed to remain there, it's going to destroy you. This is exactly what covenant breaking is. But fortunately, now we live at a time that we are talking about covenant breaking. Very few of them exist today who are opposing the house of justice. Very few of them. And they are so, we are not worried about them. We are not doing anything with them. We are just leaving it to themselves. And as I said, we don't hate them. We don't associate with them. If they write me a letter, I will not answer them. I will not read it. I'll throw it away. It's poison.
The covenant breakers have, with every major change, the death of Baha'u'llah and Shoki Effendi.
Pardon?
The covenant breakers have arisen with every major change, with the death of the central figures. There won't be any more of that. The House of Justice won't die. It'll be the same as that.
I don't know. I don't know. There may well be. There are still some who oppose the House of Justice. I think as long as Shoki Effendi mentions, he says that in every faith, people arose and divided religions into sects. They violated the covenants. In this age, he says it's the same. People will have violated the covenant, and in fact have violated it much more vigorously than any other previous dispensation. But he says the difference, and therefore probably this covenant breaking may be there till the end of this dispensation. But he says the distinguishing feature of this faith is that they have not succeeded in bringing division. They have dissipated themselves. And this is the true history of the faith. All of those things, people who rose up against the faith, where are they? Those covenant breakers of Abdu'l-Baha, they're gone and forgotten and finished and part of the history. If you want to go to Akka to find out the grave of Muhammad Ali, who was the arch breaker of the covenant, you won't find it. You don't know where he is, even buried. If you go to those hundreds of people who rose up against Shoki Effendi amongst his family and others, where are they? They're gone, finished, completely finished, without doing anything to them. They're gone. And today there may well be a few here and there. But one thing which is sure is that the cause of God will not become divided into sects. If you look at the history of other religions, you will find the sects were created immediately after the Prophet was gone. The body of Muhammad wasn't buried yet, that his followers were divided into two major sects and the fighting broke up amongst them right away. In this dispensation, this is why Baha'u'llah says this is a day that shall not be followed by night. Now I will explain to you in another way what covenant breaking is, just on a basis of nature. In nature, what is in nature covenant breaking? Just to explain to you by using the laws of nature. As I said, from nature we learn everything, really. First of all, do you know that, look at nature, you will find always opposite things attract each other. The north pole of a magnet and the south pole of a magnet are opposites. They'll attract to each other. But the two similar poles, they repulse. If you bring two north poles of a magnet together, there is a force of repulsion. Now, this is in nature. And it's the same thing in spiritually. God is one end, but the opposite to it is man, opposite pole. God is sovereign Lord of all. The opposite to it is servitude, humility. You see, these are two opposite things. And these two things attract each other. God loves to see a servant. He is attracted to a servant. He attracts to himself. But if ever somebody wants to put himself on the same level as God, or when I say God, I mean, say, the manifestation of God, or the center of the covenant, it doesn't matter. If a person wants to put himself on the same level as Baha'u'llah, or put himself on the same level as Abdu'l-Baha, or put himself on the same level as Shoki Effendi, you know, the same level, there is a force of repulsion. This is covenant breaking. As long as you are a servant, there is no problem. But as soon as you want to bring yourself on the same level, knowing what this is, knowing this is a manifestation of God, having recognized Him, you want to bring yourself on the same level, immediately there is a repulsion. Now we want to know, how do we know we bring ourselves on that same level? How do I know that how can we prove that Muhammad Ali, for instance, brought himself on the same level as Abdu'l-Baha? How do we know that those who oppose Shoghi Effendi brought themselves on the same level of Abdu'l-Baha? How can we say this? Now, there is one test for it. And the test, again, you will find in life. If I challenge you to fight with me, you and I have to be of the same strength, or else I would never dare to come and say, let us fight. You only fight with someone who is your equal or less than you. A child will never come and challenge a grown-up man. Or you and I would never challenge one of these boxers to come and fight with us, because we are not equals with them. If I challenge you to come and, if I oppose you, it means I bring myself on the same level, at least, because I'm opposing you, I'm challenging you. That is the way you can know it. When Muhammad Ali challenged Abdu'l-Baha, he brought himself on the same level. And this is repulsion. When somebody challenges and opposes Abdu'l-Baha or Shoghi Effendi, he puts himself on the same level. By virtue of opposing him, it is an indication that you consider yourself at least an equal. Otherwise you wouldn't. That is how we know. Once they oppose, this is the criterion. Once they oppose the center of the cause, then this is covenant breaking. And that has to be established, by the way, by the center of the faith. Nobody can proclaim somebody a covenant breaker. Now, why I mentioned the importance of covenant breaking and steadfastness in the covenant is that we must not only look at the history of the faith in the past and all the covenant breakings, that's part of history, which give us a great courage in the faith. It's a great pride for us, a great joy and a pride. We can mention it with pride that so many people rose up against the faith, rose up against Abdu'l-Baha, rose up against Baha'u'llah, rose up from within, rose up against Shoghi Effendi, tried to break the faith into pieces, and they did not succeed. And as Ruhiya Khanam once in one of her talks mentioned, she said, every one of these covenant breakings is a ribbon we wear in this battle. You know, a ribbon that you wear, a medal. Each one of them has proved the invincibility of the covenant of God, that you cannot break it through. Even the most fierce onslaught which had taken place in the faith had not succeeded in breaking through this great ocean. So you see, and now look at what happened at the end. Now I have no time in here to talk to you about this, and it's just coming to an end. But look at what happened when Shoghi Effendi passed away. When Shoghi Effendi passed away, the machinery of the covenant, this wall around this whole, the cause of God, was so strong that even though he had not left a will and testament, and I can tell you we don't want to go into that, the great wisdoms of not writing the will and testament. You must not think that Shoghi Effendi forgot to write the will and testament. The great wisdom. And if he had written a will and testament, I'm not going to go into it, you would see that he could have violated some of the basic principles of our faith. Now, I am not at all prepared to go into this question now because there is no time. It takes a good while to discuss this. Now we understand this. He could not have written. His hands were tied. And in spite of the fact that there were no will and testament, and in spite of the fact that the Baha'is were not only Persians who spoke the same language or only English, but that they were scattered throughout the length and breadth of this earth, coming from so many diverse backgrounds. And yet the faith of Baha'u'llah remained unshaken. The community remained unshaken. And when one of the hands came up, Mason Remy, and he said, follow me, it was only laughable, the consequences. Where is he? What's happened? It all evaporated into the air. The Baha'i community remained steadfast. It's just like every interval, the impurities were thrown out. That's all that happens. And it was a good thing. All the impurities, like the impurities of the body, which are thrown out every intervals. And even now, you said there are no possibility, you suggested there were no possibilities of covenant breaking. Well, there may be. There are always ambitious men. And somebody may come and say, well, now let us see what, they may oppose the house of justice. I don't know. There are already some who are doing it. Very few. You can count them with the fingers of your hand throughout the Baha'i world, really. Now, this is a stage that we have reached, and we have to be grateful to those souls who defended the covenant of God, who defended this cause. As I said, they rallied around Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi. There was a time that Shoghi Effendi, not one member of his family remained faithful. Not one member of the family of Abdu'l-Baha, they all rose up against him. And you might ask yourself, why is it that the person now this is the last thing I'm going to say, and we close this meeting because it's getting late. The last thing I'm going to say to you. Often people may ask themselves this question, how is it that of all the people who should rise up against Abdu'l-Baha, were his closest people, his family, his friends, his brothers, why should be that all the family of the master should rise up against Shoghi Effendi? They were the closest to him. You would expect that they wouldn't rise up against him. Now you see, this is a very significant thing to us. Now the only way I can describe it to you is this, that if you were going to see a great scientist, say you and I were going to see a great, celebrated scientist, say for instance, if Einstein was alive, we were all going to see him. Let's go and see him. Now either you know mathematics or you don't when you go and see Einstein or someone like him. You either know mathematics or you don't. If you know mathematics, when you go there and you sit down and you listen, you see him on the blackboard working with his theories and all the formulas he has worked out, and you see the way he has come out with such genius way he has proposed his theories. You will be so carried away into the world of mathematics and physics that you consider him as the greatest man, and you come out of the room so excited that if anybody asks you what was he wearing, you don't know. What would it look like even, you may not know, because you were carried away with his theories. But if you didn't know mathematics, and you looked at what he's saying, and especially if you're sitting in the front row, now some of the people who are sitting in the front row have seen a lot of things. They would say, look at this man, look at his, you won't understand what he's saying, but you can look at him very clearly because you're sitting very close to him. You would say, oh gosh, look at this fellow, his coat is not properly buttoned, his shoes are dirty, his hair is unkempt. Why they make such a fuss of him? You see now, because you don't know mathematics. And so when you come out, you find a lot of faults with him. This was not he was talking nonsense and I didn't understand it, and he was having you see all his personal side. Now this is exactly what happens with the manifestation of God. And those who are near him, his relations and his family are very close to him. They are sitting like the front row. And they have no spiritual qualities. You can be sure of this. No spiritual qualities. The only sign of spiritual qualities is if they are servants, if they are servitude. Like Abdu'l-Baha, who I told you would never enter into the room of Baha'u'llah without prostrating himself at his feet and considering himself as utter nothingness. Now, if you're not like that, you don't know mathematics in that example. Now, he knew it. He had seen nothing but the greatness of Baha'u'llah. But these people who had nothing at all, no spiritual qualities, but full of ambition, they had no share of the spiritual powers which was within him. And this is why Baha'u'llah says how many the people who have been in his presence, who hadn't seen him at all, and how many people who were never in his presence, and they had understood and recognized his greatness and glory. These people were sitting very close, and so all they saw was a human being. They saw him, he has to eat, he has to sleep. If he gets tired, if he doesn't sleep tonight, he gets sick, just like everybody else. And because they had not seen the great glory which was within him, Therefore, they were the first to rise up. You see now how it is when you're very close? They always say that when you are close to a lamp, there is a shadow near the lamp. You know these lamps which have a stand, if you look at it, there is a shadow there. The light goes around. You're close to it. When you're close to the manifestation of God, tests are very great. The slightest impurities, the slightest condition of ambition will destroy the soul. But we must thank God in this day that we have none of these problems, although we have to really deepen ourselves in the knowledge of the covenant. And I wish there was time that one could talk about the covenant. That this in itself is something which will need a long time to discuss this. But now I feel that we have come to the end, whether good or bad. We have talked a great deal, and I know that some of you are going to go. How many are going tomorrow? Well, everybody is going. So never mind. No. Huh? Oh no, everybody is going away, tomorrow. They won't see us tomorrow. It's going away tomorrow. Oh, there's a few people. Well, I would like to say to those of you who are going that for me it has been a greatest privilege and a greatest joy to be with you, really. And I hope that I haven't made you tired of all these things. And as I said, if you want to forget everything, forget those points. Just a few of them you can remember. But always remember that Baha'u'llah has to be with us. This is the thing. And this is the whole, the essence of all that we have said in our service. And that He comes to us to our assistance. He helps us. He supports us. And all this love that we have for each other, the joy and the love that is in our hearts, is not because of ourselves. Now, don't mistake that. All this love which brings us together and makes us to become like one people is not because of us that we are very important people, that we are very special people in that sense. All of this love and this joy and this unity is because of Baha'u'llah. It is His revelation. It is the forces that He has released in the world. And it is that which comes through our hearts and makes us to become one. Otherwise, if you divorce that from it, what had we in common? All of us. Very little. Nothing. And in spite of all our weaknesses, we were talking about the weaknesses of our assemblies. In spite of all the weaknesses of our assemblies, look at the way the faith is growing. Look at the way we are holding on together. If it wasn't for the cause of God and the power of Baha'u'llah, do you think we would be staying together for more than one day in a local assembly? You will disband it immediately and say, go home. We don't want to get into this thing. Oh no. But it is the cause of God, and it is the early stages. And the only thing which will help us to really become happy people and to see that the cause goes forward is to love each other through Baha'u'llah. Love. If this love is not there, then we have to fight the spiritual battle. If I cannot see everybody with the eye of love and unity, then I have to fight my spiritual battle. And as I said, we must look into each other's faces and see a trace of Baha'u'llah, and then it will all work.